Welcome to Byblos, one of the oldest cities in the world, a forgotten cornerstone of human civilization. This city was mother of the Mediterranean, and I would even say mother of Europe. And Julius Caesar and his entire extended family would likely have agreed with me. Although that's a story for another video. Let's stick with Byblos here, also known as Jubail or Jubail, Romanized Jubail, Jubal, in Phoenician Gebel, probably Gebal, is a city in the Kasserwan Jubail governorate of Lebanon, whatever. It is believed to have been first occupied between 8800 and 7000 BC, so that makes it one of the oldest cities in the world, only slightly younger than Jericho, which is generally considered the oldest city in the world, and continuously inhabited since 5000 BC. So it's founded maybe around 8800 BC or a little bit after. It gets abandoned for a while at some point, and you got to understand early civilization would have been very unstable. If there's a drought, you're gone. Okay, if there's like a 20-30 year period where there's like less rainfall than usual, then you're going to have a worse and worse harvest every year until eventually people start dropping. So, or a disease comes through or something, right? So it gets abandoned for a while and then picks back up around 5000 BC. Now, interestingly enough, 8800 BC, so at this time period when Byblos is first founded, the temple of Göbekli Tepe is still in use, and it's not too far from this site. So it's the same region, the same culture possibly. So a lot of the religion and culture coming from the time of the hunter-gatherers. Göbekli Tepe is kind of like a bridge between hunter-gatherer civilization and then sedentary, agricultural, urban civilization. Right? So if Göbekli Tepe is that bridge to urban civilization, Byblos is the beginning of that urban civilization. So, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. During its history, Byblos was part of numerous civilizations, including Egyptian, Phoenician, Assyrian, Persian, Hellenistic, Roman, Fatimid, Genoese, Mamluk, and Ottoman. The city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And I agree, it deserves to be. This city really needs more respect. It needs more attention. This is one of the foundational sites of human civilization, especially Western civilization. So things begin here. Okay. It was in ancient Byblos that the Phoenician alphabet, likely the ancestor of the Greek, Latin, and all other Western alphabets, was developed. It's also where a still undeciphered script was written much earlier than the Phoenician alphabet. And this Byblos script bears a striking similarity to Linear A and Linear B in the Aegean. And you've got to understand, Byblos is the first port city, okay? And at the time of the first farmers, people are migrating out of Byblos, going west across the Mediterranean, and going northwest, into Europe. And so they're landing in the Aegean maybe around 7000 BC, and they're spreading their culture, their traditions into that region. And so maybe it shouldn't strike us as so odd that the Greeks of the Iron Age adopt the Phoenician alphabet, but the Greeks of the Bronze Age are also adopting, the Byblos alphabet, or a syllabary, the Byblos script. So the Greeks adopting the Phoenician alphabet is not the first time they have adopted a writing system from the East. All right, let's scroll down here to etymology. Eusebius's Onomasticon stated that Byblos was known in Hebrew as Gebel or Gobel. The name appears as Kebni in Egyptian hieroglyphic records, going back to the 4th dynasty pharaoh Sneferu, around 2600 BC. And it is found as Gubla in Akkadian cuneiform in the Amarna letters to the 18th dynasty pharaohs Amenhotep III and IV. Okay, so here we see the Egyptian hieroglyphs over here. This is one from around 2100 BC, Kebni. This is one around 2000 to 1600 BC, Kebin. So you can kind of see how it's changed in different languages. Byblos is the Greek pronunciation, or the Greco-Roman pronunciation that we use in English, but you can see it kind of goes back to this Gobel, Kebni, Gubla kind of name. In the first millennium BC, its name appeared in Phoenician and Punic inscriptions as Gebal. So that's around the time of the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians. So we're getting closer to the history that we know from the history books. In the Hebrew Bible as Geval and in Syriac as Gebel, the name seems to derive from Geb, or well, and El, or God. The latter a word that could variously refer to any of the Canaanite gods or their leader in particular. The name thus seems to have meant the well of the god, or the source of the god. Yeah, so this is kind of problematic. Geb, or so you see down here, in present Arabic, the name Jubail or Jebel is a direct descendant of these earlier names, although apparently modified by a misunderstanding of the name as the triliteral root Gebel or Jebel, meaning mountain. So in Arabic, Jabal, this means like earth or mountain, like a rock. It's where the name Gibraltar comes from. Jabal Tariq. It was an Arabic word. Jabal Tariq becomes Gibraltar. But Jabal Tariq was like the rock of Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. And lots of gods in the ancient Near East, in the Mediterranean world, are associated with mountains. They rule from mountaintops. In Greece, Zeus rules from Mount Olympus. On Crete, their deities seem to rule from Mount Ida. The Trojans also had their own Mount Ida, where their gods seem to have been associated with. And Kibela, which is an Anatolian mother goddess that seems to be related to the goddess worshipped here at Byblos, she also is a mountain goddess. So some people go with that mountain meaning. So instead of well god, it's the mountain, the mountain god, the city of the mountain god, basically, instead of the city of the well god. Geb can also mean earth, just in general, just the earth itself. And Geb is also a god in Egyptian and Ethiopian mythology. And so you could also translate it as Geb and El, as if it could mean like the god of earth. It could mean a combined version of Geb and El. So a form of El that is more like an earth god. Another interesting take is that Geb, the earth god, is also a water god. He is a god of the world ocean, the cosmic oceans, from which all creation sprang. Geb is also primarily associated with the fresh waters from under the earth, the waters of the wells. So wells are very sacred. So that ties back into well gods. So there's multiple ways you could take this. Geb El. Is it the city of the well god, the city of the earth god, the city of the mountain god? So just understand that there's still a lot of questions about it. This goes back thousands of years before writing began, so we don't really have a precise way of determining where the name originated from. We don't even know if the people that founded this city back in 8800 BC actually called it Byblos or Gebelos or Gubla. These names could have come much later. We don't know that this is the origin of it, but it's interesting to think about. All of these, along with Byblos, are etymologically related. During the Crusades, this name appeared in European records as Gibele or Gible. This name was used for Byblos Castle and its associated lordship. The Phoenician city, known to the Greeks as Byblos and to the Romans as Byblos, was important for the import of papyrus from Egypt, to the extent that Byblos came to mean papyrus in Greek. The English word Bible, therefore, ultimately derives from the Greek name of the city. And that's what I'm saying. Byblos has such a profound effect on world history, especially Western history, and it's just not recognized as much as it should be. So the history, 26 miles north of Beirut, holds a strong allure for archaeologists due to its accumulations of various strata resulting from countless centuries of human dwelling. Very true. The people that are in the know how awesome Byblos is, and everyone else needs to recognize it too. The initial excavation was conducted by Ernest Renan in 1860, documented in his work Mission des Phénicies. This was succeeded by Pierre Montet's efforts from 1921 to 1924, and later by Maurice Dunant, who continued excavations from 1925 for a span of 40 years. Renan's expedition was to provide the evidence that the city did not move and that Gebel is Byblos. Yeah, the sites used kind of do shift sometimes, so you kind of have to link sites from different periods and different locations. They're all nearby, but you have to prove like a continuous inhabitation, I guess. So he was able to do that. And why are these guys all French? Well, of course, Lebanon used to be a French protectorate back in the day. So in those times, the French influence was strong, and they're the ones that conducted the initial investigations. The site appears to have been settled during the pre-pottery Neolithic B period, approximately 8800 to 7000 BC. Neolithic remains of some buildings can be observed at the site. According to the writer Philo of Byblos, quoting Sanchuniathon and quoted in Eusebius, Byblos was founded by the Phoenician shrine god El, whom the Greeks identified with their god Kronos, the father of Zeus. And let's take a look real quick here at Kronos. Egyptian equivalent, Geb. Geb, the earth god. Okay, this is what I'm saying. So Kronos is equated with Geb and with El. So the father of Zeus is Geb and El in a singular form. So some kind of form of El that is an earth god, right? Or a god of the cosmic ocean, a god of the well waters, right? So keep that in mind. And then the Roman equivalent would be Saturn. So whenever you think of the Saturnalia, guess what? This goes back to the god of Byblos, right? The religious traditions of Byblos, or at least partly. They have their ancient origins here in this city. During the 3rd millennium BC, the first signs of a town can be observed with the remains of well-built houses of uniform size. So this was the period when the Canaanite civilization began to develop. So this is when it becomes a town as we understand it, a more modern or a more solid city, whereas maybe before it was a few mud brick houses that get washed away every so often. Now it's well-built houses. We're starting to see temples around this time, so stone constructions, permanent constructions. And so this is the beginning of the Canaanite civilization. So it's a very ancient site, going back to the Stone Age, going back to the very beginning of human civilization. There is an Egyptian period. This area does get dominated by Egypt, really beginning in the Old and Middle Kingdoms, but finalized in the New Kingdom, where they completely dominate the entire Levant, all the way up to Byblos, all the way up into Syria. Okay, and then they're fighting the Hittites for control of the Levant. Why was the Levant so important? Well, Egypt doesn't have trees. The Levant has cedar forests. You can build actual ships. The Egyptians always lacked a navy. They had reed boats that were fit for navigating the Nile, but they couldn't go out into the Mediterranean Sea because there are storms. You need a more solid construction for that. And so they really depended upon the Levant being their traders for them. So they had to dominate the Levant and control this naval trade and control this forest and control this wood. And then by having that naval force, they could conduct long-range maritime trade. There's a lot of things within Egypt that they're just lacking. So wood is one. Another is iron. And this was one of the major reasons why Egypt is a superpower back in the Bronze Age, but falls off by the time of the Iron Age. There is no indigenous source of iron along the Nile. And once they lose the ability to control trade, once they lose the Levant, Egypt is at the mercy of everyone else. So that's one of the key reasons why it fell. Probably like the single greatest reason is just lack of wood and lack of iron. And just to reiterate the relationship between Egypt and Byblos, I'll just read a little bit here. Watson Mills and Roger Bullard suggest that during the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom of Egypt, Byblos was virtually an Egyptian colony. The growing city was a wealthy one, and seems to have been an ally among those who are on his waters, an ally of Egypt, for many centuries. First dynasty tombs used timbers from Byblos. One of the oldest Egyptian words for an ocean-going boat was Byblos ship. So differentiating from the reed boats on the Nile, an actual Byblos ship, a ship made of wood. Archaeologists have recovered Egyptian-made artifacts as old as a vessel fragment bearing the name of the Second Dynasty ruler Khasikhemwy. And that would have been very old. Second Dynasty is at the very beginning of Egyptian history. So to find that already in Byblos is pretty amazing. Although, this may easily have reached Byblos through trade and or at a later period. So it's mentioning a Second Dynasty ruler, but it's not proof that this fragment was in Byblos by the time of the Second Dynasty. But clearly there's an ancient relationship between Egypt and Byblos. Objects have been found at Byblos naming the 13th dynasty Egyptian king Neferhotep I, and the rulers of Byblos maintained close relationships with the new king pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Around 1350 BC, the Amarna letters include 60 letters from Rib-Hada and his successor Ilirapi, who were rulers of Byblos, writing to the Egyptian government. This is mainly due to Rib-Hada's constant pleas for military assistance from Akhenaten. They also deal with the conquering of neighboring city-states by the Habiru. So one idea is that this may be the origin of the Hebrew. So in the New Kingdom period, Egypt is ruling the Levant after, towards the end of the Bronze Age, things start falling apart a bit. You get the Sea Peoples at the end of it. And then Egypt eventually collapses. Not from the Sea Peoples, but their rulership over the Levant takes a hit, for sure. And at that time, it may pass to these people, the Habiru, who are it's a term used throughout the Fertile Crescent from the 2nd millennium BC on, variously describing rebels, outlaws, raiders, mercenaries, bowmen, servants, slaves, and laborers. So that could link back to the Hebrew, who at least get part of their descendant, at least in the mythology, as being slaves and servants of Egypt. So this Habiru, this term for a servant class, may be the origin for Hebrew. It appears that Egyptian contact peaked during the 19th dynasty, only to decline later. In addition, when the New Kingdom collapsed in the 11th century BC, Byblos ceased being a colony and became the foremost city of Phoenicia, although it'll eventually... so this is what I was about to say. Although the archaeological evidence seems to indicate a brief resurgence, yada yada yada, it is clear that after the Third Intermediate Period, the Egyptians started favoring Tyre and Sidon instead of Byblos. So Byblos is the dominant, is the first port city in the Stone Age. It's the dominant port city into the Bronze Age. By the time of the Iron Age, Tyre and Sidon replace it in the mythology and in the the dominance of trade and all that. So we'll skip this here. Ancient history, I mean, that's cool. It eventually falls, the Levant falls into the Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, then the Greeks, then the Romans. So it loses its independence. Really, its golden age was the Stone Age and into the Bronze Age. That was when it was dominant and independent. Okay, here we go. The Byblos archaeological site. So these are the sites I wanted to talk about. Wrap the video up here. The King's Spring, the L-shaped temple, the Temple of Obelisks, the Royal Necropolis, I suppose. But let's first talk about this. Ain el-Malik, or King's Spring, about 20 meters deep, is a large cavity accessible by spiral stairs. Once it supplied the city with water. According to Plutarch's version of the Egyptian Osiris myth, the king's servant met Isis on the stairs of the spring and took her to the royal palace, where she found the body of her husband, Osiris, embedded in one of the palace pillars. Now, this is crazy, okay? And it shows how intertwined Egyptian and Levantine mythology and history are. That they would have what is, by the time of the New Kingdom, the most prominent myth of God and goddess and the resurrection of the divine child. They have the most prominent one in New Kingdom Egypt was Osiris and Isis giving birth to Horus. So God and goddess and the divine child. And the fact that that's being tied in with the god and goddess of Byblos, so in the legend, Osiris gets killed by his brother Set. He's chopped to pieces, put in a coffin, and set adrift. And then he goes, the coffin drifts all the way to Lebanon, drifts to Byblos, gets embedded in the roots of a growing cedar tree. That cedar tree is cut down and used as a pillar in the palace of the king of Byblos. And then Isis, searching for Osiris, comes to Byblos and is forlorn, and she's sitting by the king's spring, the ancient well, the well of the well god, right? The city of the well god, right? That's one of the possible names for Byblos, or translations of Byblos. She's sitting there and she's weeping the death of her partner. And the palace officials come and they bring her to the palace, and then that's when they find out, oh, Osiris is in our palace pillar. And pillars are symbols of stability. They're attached to the creator in Egyptian mythology, Ptah, who's also associated with Osiris. He holds the Jed pillar, which brings stability to the universe. So Osiris, the dead form of Ptah, being found in this pillar. I mean, the symbolism is like really deep. And this is going back to the most ancient times. And if we look at genetics, okay, here's what's even more fascinating. If we look at genetics, okay, there was the DE haplogroup, the origin of the D and E haplogroups. D goes off to the east and becomes like the Tibetans and the Ainu of Japan. But the E haplogroup goes south into Africa, back into Africa, so migrating out of Africa, then back into Africa. It splits in Ethiopia. And there's the branch that goes down south and becomes a lot of the male ancestry of modern sub-Saharan Africans. And the other branch goes north into the Sahara and Northeast Africa, into Egypt. And it also goes into the Levant, including the area around Byblos. What's even more profound about this is that in the Ethiopian telling, it is Geb and his wife, either the sky goddess Nut or the sky and water goddess Tefnut. It is Geb and his wife, which are the prominent god and goddess. And they give birth to the divine child, Horus the Elder. It's an elder version of Horus, an older version, where he is the son of Geb and Nut, not Osiris and Isis. And I've talked to you earlier about how Geb may be associated with this form of El in Byblos. So an older version brought from Ethiopia all the way up into Byblos thousands of years ago, okay? And the E haplogroup comes into Greece around 7000 BC. It comes into Europe around 7000 BC. Most Europeans that have an E haplogroup are descended from this first farmers' migration coming into Europe from Egypt, from the Levant, right? And again, Kronos is associated with El and Geb and is the father of Zeus. So we can see like they're preserving the migration into Byblos, and then from Byblos we can track it elsewhere. We can see like how the mythology is tracking their history. Geb is the god associated with this city. Geb is the Ethiopian equivalent of Osiris, basically. He's the father of the divine child. And he gets replaced. So Geb gets replaced by Osiris and Isis as the Egyptian story of the birth of the divine child. So Osiris and Isis are also associated with this god and goddess at Byblos. And it goes back to the most ancient mythologies, the most ancient era of human history. Really goes back back to the time of the first farmers. It's mind-blowing. All right, I was going to talk a little bit about the temples that are on the Acropolis of Byblos. The L-shaped temple, the Temple of Obelisks, and the Temple of Baalat Gebal. But this video has kind of already gone on long enough, so I'm going to end it here, and we'll save that discussion for the next video. This is going to be the first video in a series of videos. I'm going to make a playlist. You can check it on my channel about Byblos and Byblos-related topics. And if you think there's any value in this, hit like and subscribe, leave a comment. I appreciate it. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to support the channel. I'm going to try to use comparative mythology, archaeology, genetics. We're going to try to use all of this and try to reconstruct some level of history out of this era of prehistory. Because hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. You can see how they have recorded their history in their oral traditions, in their mythology. And once you start to put it all together, once you start to know which gods and goddesses, which stories are related with which regions, and how these stories kind of overlap and mix together and then diverge, you can kind of see how it tells the story of, the migration, how the cultures are interconnected and how they spread across the Mediterranean at the time of the first farmers. This is a foundational layer of history that predates the Indo-Europeans. Just as impactful, maybe more so, because it happens earlier, just as impactful as the Indo-Europeans. It spreads across the exact same region from Ireland to northern India. And, a lot of what we consider like the basal level of Indo-European mythology actually comes from this first farmers mythology as well. So we're peering back into that era of prehistory and trying to reconstruct a story out of it, a partial history for this era of prehistory. So if you like where I'm going with this, you see some value in this, hit like and subscribe, like I said. I appreciate it. And check back in next time. I'll see you then.